Without further ado, I have the honor to introduce our first speaker for the day. And she has her bio in the conference program there, and I'm going to read it. But again, this is someone that this bio does not give it justice at all. But I'm pleased to welcome Ms. Kimberly Lewis, and she is the president and CEO of Goodwill Industries of East Texas and the owner of Motivational Muse, LLC. She's an author, a speaker, consultant, and frequent contributor to the Forbes magazine as a member of the Forbes Nonprofit Council. She has been awarded the 2020 Diversity and Inclusion Champion Award from Goodwill Industries International and the 2021 Inclusive Community Development Award from the National Disability Institute and the 2022 PJ Trevathan, thank you, Award for Outstanding Training. So please help me welcome Ms. Kimberly Lewis to the stage.
Good morning. I may or may not need this because I have my teacher preacher voice on. Let me see if I can make this thing work though. All right. So welcome. I'm here to kick off your day, give you some energy and some excitement. And I know you had a long day yesterday, so thank you for showing back up today. And hopefully we will learn some things. And I'm going to be speaking about biases. And I want you to remember one thing, the title. Don't blame people, blame the systems. You know, sometimes we have a tendency to blame individuals for things that are going on without knowing their backstory. So don't blame people, blame the systems. So first of all, let's talk about the definition of bias and what is a bias. Now, bias is not the same thing as a prejudice, but it can lead to prejudiced behavior. It is prejudice in favor or against one thing, a person or a group, compared with another, usually in a way that is considered to be unfair. So for example, I was raised in the deep South, where we had grits every morning with butter, no sugar. Okay? So I have a prejudice for grits and against cream of wheat. Now some of you, Shabella, prefer cream of wheat. I don't like the texture of cream of wheat. Shabella does not like the texture of grits, so she has a bias against grits. Okay? I don't even think that's right. I think we should just take her card away from her, just, throw her out the room. So an unconscious bias or an implicit bias, as it is referred to, are social stereotypes about certain groups of people, and we all know what they are. Show me or tell me some of those biases. Anybody? I got certain groups of people. Yes, ma'am.
All black people love watermelon.
All black people love watermelon. Right? That's a bias. That is a stereotype. Give me another one.
Fried chicken.
All black people like fried chicken. Give me another one.
All Asians are highly intelligent.
I'm sorry, say again.
Asians are highly intelligent.
Asians are highly intelligent. Right? So we know what they all are, Our blondes are ditzy. Okay? That's a stereotype. Not true, a stereotype. Everyone holds, and I mean everyone, holds unconscious biases. And where do these biases come from? They come from where you were raised, how you were raised, the neighborhood you came from, your parents, your grandparents, your life's experiences, right? Good or bad. And I always tell the story that, when I was a little girl, I was raised in Charleston, South Carolina, deep South, right? Deep South. And my sisters are, were 9 and 10 years older than me. And so when I was a little girl, we'd be sitting at the table and they'd be talking about some cute boy, that they wanted to date. And so my dad would say, well, if he can't use your comb, you don't bring him home. Now, who knows what that means? Yes, ma'am.
If he's not black, don't bring him home.
Don't bring him home. Now, what does the comb have to do with it? It's the texture of hair, right? And so as a little girl, I really didn't know what he was talking about, but I heard this so much. So by the time I started putting two and two together, I was like, oh, he's saying you better not bring the white boy home. Okay, so what does that mean? Then that created a bias in me. Well, why? I have friends at school who are white. Why? You know, will they not be accepted in my family? Will I not be accepted in their family? Are they bad people? You know, as a child, you start thinking about all those kinds of things. So as an adult, I had to unravel those biases. And that's what I'm encouraging you all to do, because we all have them. We all have them. You know, someone born in this particular city versus that particular city. Someone who went to school at this school versus that school. We all have biases, which are preconceived notions about what we think about them based on where they came from, what they're doing, sometimes even their names. So unconscious bias is triggered by our brain automatically to make judgments and assessments about a person. So when I walked into the room, I know I garnered all eyes, because I always do. So what do you think about me when I walked into the room? Did you think, oh, well, that's the speaker? Or, oh, I don't know who she thinks she is. She ain't got her little blue t-shirt on. You know, she ain't got her name tag on, but who she thinks she is? Okay.
I thought that's a nice professionally dressed man.
Thank you. Thank you. But when we see someone, we already make an assessment, right? We start sizing them up. I've actually seen people look at me and go, They size me up, and I feel like I want to turn around and say, okay, you want to check this out? You know, let's do a 360 for you so you can really make an assessment, okay? But we make an assessment, we say, okay, well, she's a young person, she's an older person, she's married, she's single, she's working, she's not working, she's from the hood, she's bougie. That would be me, I'm bougie. She's low income, she's overweight, she's too thin, she's anorexic. All of these kinds of assumptions that we haven't even spoken to the person yet. In a very short amount of time, just milliseconds, we immediately make an assessment of that individual. So here are all the different biases that community health workers make in community health care. Anybody, really. So we're going to go through a few of them. Confirmation bias. I knew it. See, when I looked at her, I already knew she was bougie. I already knew she had her head stuck in the clouds. Confirmation bias. And then she says something that, they got hamburger? I don't eat hamburger. See, I already knew it. She thought this was going to be a filet mignon. Okay? That's when you form an opinion of a person based on the things like their name, their where they live, where they work, what they eat, what they don't eat, all of those kinds of things. Confirmation bias, based on what you already thought, without necessarily knowing anything about that person. Then you have attribution bias. When you try to judge a person's behavior based on prior observations. See, I knew he was trouble. He was trouble when he walked in the door. He came in late. Okay, he came in loud and wrong. I knew he was trouble. Because it was based on prior observations. Horns effect. Okay, Horns effect. The tendency to view someone negatively after learning something unpleasant about them. Okay, after learning something unpleasant about them. Such as, did you know that he served time in jail? Girl, let me grab my purse. You don't even know what the condition was or even if it's true, right? But you made an assessment. Gender bias. Now, you know, there are so many gender biases. All men are dogs. Is that gender bias? All women are gold diggers. Gender bias, right? Ageism. Give me some examples of ageism. I'm sorry? She's too old for that job.
I'm dealing with that now. I'm too young to be their manager.
Oh, you're too young. You don't know nothing. You still got pablum on your lips, girl. You're too young. I don't even know what pablum is, but I hear the old people say it. You know.
Even in traffic, you're behind somebody slow, you not just got to be an old person.
Ageism. You know, when we see someone young in a job, they don't have the experience. They can't tell me anything. You see someone older performing a task, they're not tech savvy.
Child, it's time for them to go home.
They need to just, you know, go ahead and retire and, you know, let me have that job. I know my staff is saying that, but it's okay. Beautiful bias. Now, I get attacked with this all the time. Believe me. Beautiful bias, where people believe that attractive people are somewhat more successful. Do you know that there's actually a study that was conducted that white males over 6 feet tall or over, are considered to be the most successful. So if you have a tall white male to come into the room, people will assume he's the boss, right? But guess what? It's not true. First of all, there aren't that many 6 feet tall or over men, unless they're playing for the NBA. Okay? There aren't that many. And so that's not, there are lots of, our national CEO is probably just about maybe a half a foot taller than I am. And that ain't saying a whole lot. He's about half a foot. Brilliant man. Half a foot taller than I am. Most are not that tall. How many of you have been in a restaurant or been out somewhere and you've seen a really tall man? And the first thing people ask him is, what team did you play for? I used to have a neighbor in West Virginia, and he was about 6'9" maybe, and it would aggravate his wife. She and I were friends. It would aggravate his wife because my house was one of the first ones coming up the hill. And my light, I had a really tall ceiling, and so one of my light bulbs was out. And so she was like, you've got to change that light bulb. That runs me crazy when I'm coming by here and that light bulb was not on. I was like, listen, Tess, I can't get up there. You see my height. I don't have a ladder that tall. She was like, well, I do. And so she came to change the light bulb. Well, I thought she was going to bring her husband because he's tall. And I said, I'm looking. She's dragging the ladder in. I'm like, Tess, where's Arion? And she was like, oh, he can't climb a ladder. He's afraid of heights. What kind of madness is that? Is he afraid of himself? She said, oh, he gets vertigo anytime he gets up on the step ladder. I have to do all the work in the house. And I was like, oh, good night. You know, that was my own bias, thinking, okay, he's already tall. He can't be afraid of heights, right? The height-weight bias. You tend to judge the success of a person based on their height or their weight. Oh, see, she way too big. She way too big. And y'all know, you know, if y'all in the black church, and you see the sisters coming around, okay, and a little bit wide, and you hear the old woman, she needs to have on a girdle. She need to have on a foundation. You know, what we doing all of that for? Okay. I know you heard it Sunday, and you'll hear it again next Sunday. But sometimes people think that if you're in their eyes too big, or in their eyes too small, or in their eyes whatever physical attributes that you have, that has something to do with your job. that has a success, one time we had a loss prevention officer, and he was in a wheelchair. And his cousin asked me, well, how he gonna be in loss prevention? Who he gonna chase down? I had to educate folks. I was like, listen, it's a mind game. It's not a physical game. We don't want him to chase down anybody. That's for the police officers to do. It's a mind game. So, a lot of people say, well, you know what? That was back in the day. Racism doesn't exist. Prejudice doesn't exist. We live in a totally woke society, right? Do we live in a woke society? No. So what about now? Well, let's go back in the day and let's dig back into the history as it pertains to healthcare and the trust of healthcare workers. Between 1932 and 1972, there was a study called the Tuskegee Study of Untreated Syphilis in the Negro Male. Many people will just refer to it as the Tuskegee Experiment, because it really was an experiment. And basically what they did is they surveyed or found out that there were men who had gone to the doctor, gone to the clinic, and they were complaining of certain symptoms, and they found that they had syphilis, but they did not tell them that they had syphilis. Instead, they said, oh, you have a blood disorder, and we're going to treat you for this blood disorder. And so they would meet with them, and they would give them shots, and what they were really, really trying to determine is how the black male body responded to syphilis. So they allowed these men to walk around untreated for decades, to even pass it to their wives. That wasn't that long ago. How many of you were alive in 1972? Think about yourselves. Think about your fathers. Think about your brothers, your uncles. Would you consider or be appreciative of a doctor not giving them the proper diagnosis because they wanted to test a theory? And the theory was based on what? Bias. Based on bias. Oh, black men are stronger, they can handle anything. Black women are stronger, they can handle anything. They don't need that painkiller. They can handle it. And this was conducted by the Department of Health, Education and Welfare, the Public Health Health Services, and Mental Health Administration. They studied all of this, and then it finally came out and broke the news. And by the time that all of that happened, 40 of their wives had already contracted syphilis. But that was it, right? So what about now? Well, first of all, do you know who that handsome man is? Well, I kind of already told you. That was my daddy. That's my daddy. And that was me and my mom. You see how cute I am? See, I had that beautiful bias thing going on already. So let me tell you my story of bias. In 1964, on a rainy evening, my mother went into labor with me. My parents had just moved to Charleston, South Carolina. I am the youngest of 4 children. Prior to that, my siblings had all been born in a small one-room country shack by a midwife on the farm. So my dad was super excited because in 1964, the Civil Rights Act had been passed, and that made it illegal for anyone to discriminate against a person based on the color of their skin, any place, especially in a public institution like a state hospital. So they moved to Charleston. He was so excited because he had always worried that something would go wrong during the birth of one of his children. And he said, oh, okay, we can go to the Medical University of South Carolina, the best hospital around. and my fourth child can be delivered. So on that night, my mom went into labor. He drove her to the hospital, pulled up on the ramp like that. This time it was pouring down raining, and my mom was writhing in pain. And she said, something's wrong. This is different. This is different than the other three. She began to hemorrhage. By the time that he got her out of the car and into the waiting room, blood and rain and sweat and tears were running down her leg. There in the center of the room was a group of doctors and nurses who were talking and laughing about whatever was going on, seemingly not even seeing my mother sitting there on the corner. My dad took the car and he parked it. He ran back in, surprised that they had not attended to his wife. So he ran up to the desk and he said, you gotta come help, you gotta come help. My wife, she's having a baby, something's wrong, something. Can't you see the blood? And they did this. They literally turned their backs and fell silent. He ran all around that little desk, yelling and screaming at them 3 times. My wife, you gotta come, you gotta help. See, she's right there. She's right there. She's gonna die. You gotta come, you gotta come. On the 3rd time, as he's screaming at the top of his lungs, one of the nurses says, just leave her right there. We'll get to her. Well, he knew what that meant. But he also remembered that there was a black-owned hospital 4 blocks down the street. He saw a wheelchair in the corner. Now remember, it was pouring down rain. He didn't even think about, I gotta go get the car. He scooped my mother up, he put her in the wheelchair, and he said, hold on, baby. She grabbed the arm of that wheelchair and she white-knuckled it, and he ran full tilt in the pouring down rain with my mother hemorrhaging, and got her to the McLennan Banks Hospital, 4 blocks away. The building still stands there. The ramp of Medical University is still there. Still looks the same. That little circle where the doctors and nurses, the little supposed to be a welcome desk, is still there. When he wheeled my mother into the room, they immediately saw her. They came over, they grabbed her, they put her on a gurney, and they took her to surgery. There was a doctor visiting there, and he was from South Africa. He delivered me by cesarean section. Fortunately, I survived, and my mother survived. He named me Kimberly after the Kimberley diamond mines in South Africa. And I heard that story growing up because I wondered, Kimberly, that's an odd name for our family. Where did that come from? So my father told me where the name came from. And I was a little puzzled. Well, why would they treat my mommy that way? And I tell that story because I am 58 years old, soon to be 59. It wasn't that long ago when people's biases created a prejudice that would allow medically trained individuals and professionals to allow a baby and a mother to die based on the color of our skin. So biases can be dangerous because they can color, no pun intended, they can color how we treat people, what we feel that they are entitled to, the kind of treatment that we feel like they deserve. So, you say, well, you know what, that was almost 59 years ago. You know, things have changed. Really? So this beautiful young lady is my oldest daughter, Jasmine. And when Jasmine was 4 or 5 years old, I was sent a note that said that I needed to come to the clinic and bring my daughter because she had tested positive for lead. They'd done these little tests in school. And I thought to myself, that's a bunch of caca. My daughter has not been anywhere where there's any lead, unless y'all got it in the school and you gave it to her. So I did not take my daughter. I went. And so we went, and there was this little tiny room, and they called me up, and a doctor was sitting there in his white coat, and he said, well, where's your daughter? And I said, well, I did not bring her, because I wanted to see what this was really all about. And he said, well, it's obvious. You know, she's tested for lead, so we have to do the study on her. Study, you say? My mind goes back to the Tuskegee study. Study, you say? Oh, no, sir. You shan't be studying my daughter or putting her through any type of experiment that you want to put her through. And he said, well, she had to have been exposed. I said, where? I said, we live in a brand new house. My parents' house was built after 1970. The house we were living in 1970. When did we move in the house? 1979. Prior to my daughter being born. She had not been even to my grandparents' house at that point, because her house had burned down. She had not been there. She had not been anywhere where she could have been exposed to lead. And so when I explained that to him, he said, well, did you go to your grandparents' house? He asked me first, well, what do you do for a living? And I said, oh, I'm a newspaper reporter for the Post and Courier. He said, oh. He said, well, did you go to your grandparents' house? And this is just the way he said it. I said, yes. Well, you're probably exposed to lead too. And you would have been an editor if you hadn't been diminished. I said, oh, we playing that game. I packed up my stuff and I just walked out. It still exists, folks. Now, I don't know what game they were trying to play, but they weren't going to play it with me or my child. So today, she is an attorney. She is being sworn in there by now Congressman Nathaniel Moran. He did a wonderful job and still asks about her and remembers her and gave her some great advice. But again, lead paint was banned in 1978. She was born in 1991. So how would she come in contact with lead paint? You know, and what I later found out is that all the black kids in the class had been summoned. Okay. So now let's look at COVID. Now I know all of you in here read, heard, may have even experienced some of the hesitation, I'll say, of African Americans to get the vaccine. Approximately 97.9% out of every 100,000 African Americans have died from COVID-19. A mortality rate that is a third higher than that for Latinos, and more than double of that for whites and Asians. So, based on the stories that I've just told you, why do you think that is? Do you think it's just because some were reluctant and did not get vaccinated? What do you think?
Mistrust. Medical mistrust.
Medical?
Mistrust.
Medical mistrust. Yeah, medical mistrust. Any others? That's the main thing, medical mistrust. That's why many people did not go readily at first. It was like, I remember that Tuskegee thing. You ain't get me up in there. No way, no way. They had to research it and be convinced that this was something that would not harm them and harm their families, because we have not forgotten. I have many stories, many more than I've told you, but I'm sure that all of you also have many stories. When someone made an assumption about you that simply was not true, just based on the way you look, where you came from, what school you went to, your educational level, your socioeconomic background, you know, all of those things. I was in a conference, and it was right there in Fort Worth, and it was a gentleman from New York City. And we were talking about, this was a Goodwill thing, so we were talking about clothing and textiles and all of that, and he was making a presentation on denim and jeans and all of this, and a new business venture that he thought would be profitable for us. But he turned everybody off, because the first thing he said, which had absolutely nothing to do with his presentation, was, well, one of my assistants is African American. And African Americans have a hard time saying certain words. They can't say the word ask. They say ax. Now, mind you, I'm the only African American in the room, as I usually am. And so I sat and I looked at him. I was like, okay, where are you going with this? And so he kept on, and then he went on to something else. And so I raised my hand, and I said, excuse me, I was trying to see where you were going with this, but let me back you up a little bit. First of all, I'm African American. I have no problem saying the word ask. Neither do my parents, or my sisters, or my cousins. There may be a certain way that people pronounce things, but it has nothing to do with their race. It has to do with their community, their colloquialism. And you're making a determination about the educational level of someone based on whether they can say a word or two. He says, well, they have a hard time saying, the word aluminum. And I said, aluminum.
Ask a Brit, it's aluminium.
Yeah, well, they say ambulance. I said, ambulance. What's your point? What's your point? So you're already showing us your biases, and so pretty soon he got kicked out of the room. But he made some other faux pas as well. I was like, what is this guy? So he called me later and he apologized then, but he also called me later because he wanted to educate himself. So I applauded him for wanting to educate himself. And he was younger than I am. And this was probably about 6-7 years ago. And he was probably in his early 40s. So he had already learned somewhere biases, right? And he was taking that into his career. He had taken it into his professional presentations. So look from within first. Look from within. You want to make sure that you are inclusive in your thinking, in the way that you do things, in the places that you go. And so let me just ask a question. I'm going to go ahead and ask you all to be real transparent. Can you think of something in your lives that you have a bias about? That you have a bias about? Oh, so it's like that, y'all scared. Don't be scared. Don't be scared. We're going to be transparent. Anything you have a bias about. What about education? Oh, that person didn't graduate from high school. So they have no focus. They didn't graduate from high school. They have no focus. That's a bias. Yes, ma'am.
I think maybe a bias as a parent may be that your child needs to go to college versus seeking advanced skills or other options or other
vocational skills. Exactly. That's a huge bias. It's a huge bias. And I'll repeat it for her. She said one of the biases as a parent is thinking that your child has to go to college and get a degree of some sort, as opposed to going to a trade school or a vacation. My dad was a brick mason. Took care of our family very well. He's a brick mason. He was a pastor. Now, he did go to college as well, but he didn't go till 4 years. He went to School of Divinity, and he got his associates. But he was a stickler for education. So he wanted his children to get an education. He wanted us to go to college. I'm the only one who went to college and graduated from college. But at first he was like, just get you a good job, a good trade, that's good, that's great. But as things progressed, he began to look around and see that the better jobs required some type of college education. And so he pushed me to go to college. But in today's world, who all has had to call a plumber recently? They not working for chicklets, are they? No, they're kind of expensive. You know, HVAC. Truck drivers. So you can make a great living at any of those occupations. Then we also want to learn about others. Be curious. Genuinely be curious about other people and their lives and their experiences and their grandparents, where they came from, what's their heritage. Learn about them. Don't make a crass decision about someone. Be curious and learn about them, and then encourage them to learn about you as well. That's how you build relationships, because really that's the thing that tears down prejudice. It tears it down. I told the story about my birth for the first time in a public setting. I want to say it was in 2018 maybe. I was presenting at a Goodwill Industries International Conference, and the topic of that was superwomen. And so they had 3 of us female CEOs up there. We were talking, and I had not planned to tell that story. Hadn't really even thought about it for a minute, and hadn't really planned to tell it. And it was the way that he asked the question, because I had been working on diversity efforts for our national office and our national network, and I'd been leading and charging those efforts. And he asked the question in a similar manner to, well, what drives you? We know that you're a founder of the DEI task force, and it's now at every conference, and you've been pushing this for a number of years, and you've helped to lead the way for the toolkit that we all use. What drives you to do all of that extra work on top of running your Goodwill? And because he phrased it that way, my history came back to me. And so when I told that story to a group of all white CEOs, because I was the only black CEO at the time, when I told that story, the room went silent. And afterwards, a few people came up and they talked to me about it, and one woman came up and she said, "You know what, you changed my perspective." So I'm scratching my head, well, what was your perspective before? I need to be careful about you. What was your perspective before? Okay. That was different. So that let me know that I had a lot of work to do within our network, within the community, and everywhere that I plant my feet, there's a lot of work to do in that arena. Engage in dialogue. Ask questions. Sometimes we get a little nervous about asking questions, and we don't want to offend someone, but be curious, not judgmental. There's a way to ask a question, and get to know the person before you start delving into everything. And for God's sake, don't walk up to a black person or woman and touch her hair. I'm going to just tell you right now, I'm trying to save some of y'all. I'm trying to save you. You will get bent and lit real quick. Okay? Don't do that. Don't do that. But if you have a question about the hair, or about, their family or their upbringing or anything of that nature, once you have established a little bit of rapport, just don't come out shooting questions, But once you have established a rapport, then yes, ask questions. Ask questions so that you can learn and know and understand. We're living in such a blended society. I would venture to say there are very few families that don't have various races and ethnicities in their direct family line. I'm not talking about way back in slavery time. I'm talking about today. Through marriage and through adoption and all of those things, we have a blended society. So it's about time we start acting as though we have a blended society, right? Be curious, not judgmental. And then we also want to expand the options. Brainstorm on possible solutions. If you're having a difficult time attracting Hispanic workers into your field. Brainstorm solutions amongst yourself and amongst other individuals who are Latino, okay? Brainstorm solutions. And I used to run the Goodwill in West Virginia for 10 years, where the population of African Americans is 3%. And I tell people that was me and my family. We were celebrities. I lie to you not. Cameras followed us around all the time. We were in the newspaper. We were on television. Soon as we hit town, it's like they sent out a memo. What's going on? I mean, we'd show up to the museum. Oh, click, 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 click. We'd be on the front page. Because they were really, and I found out, they were really trying to show diversity. You know, they were trying to, but there wasn't a whole lot of diversity that they could show. And some of it was because it wasn't that there weren't African Americans in the community. They weren't going to a lot of the places that we went to because of the negative history. I'll never forget, they have a beautiful museum of glass, the Huntington Museum of Glass. West Virginia is known for its mouth-blown glass, gorgeous. I have a collection of it. But back in the day, this museum, which you have to, kind of go up this road and it sits up on a hill, African Americans were not welcome. And Chevella's from West Virginia, so she knows this. They were not welcome up on that hill. They were not welcome to come in that area, in that community, because there were higher income homes there. So our pastor got a call from the museum, and they were really trying to build more diverse patrons of the museum. And so the museum director had an idea. We'll have a Sunday fest, and we'll ask for choirs from African American churches to come in and sing, and we'll have, we have cookies and cookies and punch, cookies and punch. And, they would have different displays. And I remember one was quilts that were made by, local women's groups and all of those kinds of things. And so he was a little reluctant. He was like, well, why you want us up there now? You didn't want us up there 15 years ago. Why you want us up there now? And so they had to build a relationship with him before he would allow his choir, and they knew that he was the most highly respected minister in the community. So if he said yes, everyone else would follow. So they had to get him on board first. And so they took some time and built that relationship. And he went up there to see how he was going to be treated. He didn't let him know he's coming. He went up on his own. Okay, let me see how I'm going to be treated before I ask my parishioners to come. And so he went. Everything was fine. And he came, he said, okay, we're going to try this. But if it doesn't work, that's it. And so we ended up going many, many, many times. And we even went to another museum in Ashland to sing and perform, because all the other museums said, oh, this is a fantastic idea, let's all do that. And so it got more people to actually come to the museum and see the various offerings that they had, and also see that they were indeed welcome to be there. So expand your possibilities, expand your world. Don't make an assumption that you're no longer welcome. You might have to stick your pinky toe in and test the waters a little bit, to see, is this safe for me and my children? Is this okay for me and my family to attend, or my coworkers to attend? Are we going to be treated well? And then if you are, great. Continue to patronize. Experiment and evaluate. Experiment and evaluate. And this is all self-analysis, remember? Self-analysis. Test yourself. I want you to kind of move out. Go to places that you haven't been to before. Talk to people that you haven't spoken to before. Seek out opportunities to learn about different cultures. Go different places. Talk to everybody. And really get to know them. If you're on a plane somewhere, I put my little headphones on. I really don't want to be bothered, because sometimes you get somebody who will just talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. But if you're so inclined and not too sleepy, go ahead and talk to them and find out who they are. So we're going to embrace the possibilities of a more equitable community where there is fairness, compassion, and care for all people. A community in which we are all valued and the work that we do and the contribution to society that we make. If we do all of these things and do self-evaluation, because it begins with self, then this is the mantra that we can live by. Thank you.